Angela had always lived a life where she was easy to miss. She was neither loud nor demanding, neither someone who sought attention nor someone who expected praise. To most people, she was just a maid, a figure who moved quietly from one room to another, polishing tables, dusting shelves, arranging flowers, or carrying trays. But inside her heart, she carried a world of thoughts, dreams, and watchful eyes that never seemed to rest. She worked in the mansion of Mr. Whitmore, a man whose wealth was known far and wide. His name often appeared in newspapers, magazines, and television channels. Some called him a genius businessman, others described him as a lucky man who always knew how to turn opportunities into gold. His mansion reflected his life. It was vast, filled with shining marble floors, tall chandeliers, priceless art, and gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly. For most who entered the mansion, the place felt magical, like a palace. Guests often walked in with wide eyes, admiring the grand staircase, the golden mirrors, the velvet carpets, and the endless rows of servants ready to please. But for Angela, this palace was her workplace, not her dream. She had seen every corner of it, from the shining halls to the silent back rooms where staff rested for a few minutes in between tasks. Angela was not born into wealth. She grew up in a small neighborhood where people worked hard every day just to get by. Her mother used to tell her, "No matter where you work, do it with honesty, and no one can take away your dignity." Those words stayed in Angela's heart, like a gentle song that guided her through life. She may not have had expensive clothes or jewels, but she had something greater: self-respect. When she first joined Mr. Whitmore's staff, she was nervous. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen before. Everything was bigger, brighter, and more elegant than she had imagined. At first, she felt lost among the glitter and the rush of wealthy visitors. But over time, she learned the rhythm of the mansion. She knew when Mr. Whitmore preferred his tea, how he liked his books arranged in the library, which flowers brightened the hallways best, and how to keep the mirrors spotless before evening guests arrived. Yet, no matter how much work she put in, Angela was rarely noticed. Guests often brushed past her as though she were invisible. Some would hand her a glass without even making eye contact. Others would talk among themselves about deals, travels, or expensive purchases, never imagining that Angela was listening and observing quietly in the background. To them, she was just part of the furniture there, but not important. But Angela didn't mind much. She found a kind of quiet strength in being overlooked. It allowed her to watch carefully, to notice details others didn't see. While most eyes were fixed on the glamorous dresses or sparkling jewelry, Angela noticed the tired expression behind a smile, the way someone avoided looking at another person, or how a hand trembled ever so slightly when lifting a glass. She was, in her own way, a silent guardian of the mansion, making sure everything ran smoothly, and nothing went unnoticed. Mr. Whitmore himself was polite to her, though distant. He was a man always in a hurry, surrounded by advisors, guests, and family. Yet, Angela sometimes saw glimpses of the man beyond the billionaire. She noticed how, when he thought no one was watching, he would stand near the garden pond in silence, as though searching for peace in the rippling water. She noticed how he kept an old photo of his late wife on his study desk, touching the frame lightly whenever he passed by. These small, human details made Angela see him not just as her employer, but as a person carrying both pride and pain. Life in the mansion was not easy. The staff worked long hours, often on their feet all day, rushing between the needs of the family and the endless stream of guests. Angela, however, carried herself with patience. She was never quick to complain. She knew life outside the mansion could be much harder, and so she counted her blessings. At least she had steady work, a roof over her head, and food on her table. Still, there were nights when she would lie awake in her small staff quarters, wondering if this was all her life would ever be. She dreamed sometimes of opening her own little cafe, a place where people would sit, talk, and be kind to one another, unlike the hurried, polished world of the mansion. But dreams, she reminded herself, cost money, and for now, reality demanded her focus. Everything changed the night of the grand celebration. Mr. Whitmore had invited some of the most powerful people in the country to his home. Politicians, celebrities, businessmen, and even foreign dignitaries were expected. The mansion glittered with lights, the air filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. The staff had been preparing for weeks, and Angela, though exhausted, was determined to play her part well. As she moved quietly among the guests, balancing a tray of drinks with practiced grace, she felt the familiar sense of invisibility. People reached out for glasses without a single word of thanks, turning back to their conversations about business deals and new ventures. Angela, as always, stayed in the background. Yet, her eyes kept moving. She observed not just what people wanted her to see but what they tried to hide. Her life had taught her that sometimes danger hides in silence, that sometimes the smallest details can carry the greatest meaning. And on that night, while the mansion sparkled with joy, Angela's watchful eyes were about to notice something that no one else did, something that would change everything. The night of the celebration was unlike any other Angela had seen in the mansion. Every corner seemed to shine with golden light. Musicians played softly near the entrance, filling the air with pleasant melodies. The scent of fresh flowers floated from tall vases that stood proudly in every hall. Crystal glasses sparkled as servants, including Angela, moved among the guests, offering drinks and food with practiced smiles. It was a night meant for joy, power, and display. Men wore suits that looked like they were stitched by the finest hands in the world. Women wore gowns that glowed like starlight, decorated with jewels that could pay for a house in Angela's neighborhood. Conversations filled the air about new projects, big deals, and travels to places Angela had only read about in magazines. But while most people admired the wealth and glamour, Angela's eyes kept wandering, observing quietly as she always did. She was used to being invisible, and tonight, invisibility was her strength. As she walked through the hall with a tray of drinks balanced steadily in her hands, her gaze fell upon a man near the far end of the room. He didn't look like the others. While most guests laughed, smiled, or leaned into conversations, this man stood apart, almost as if he didn't belong. His suit was plain compared to the others, and though he held a glass, he never lifted it to his lips. His eyes were fixed, not on the music or the food, but on Mr. Whitmore, who was laughing warmly with a group of politicians near the center of the hall. Angela paused for just a second, pretending to adjust the tray she carried. Something about the man unsettled her. It wasn't just his stillness. It was the tension in his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand stayed close to his jacket pocket as though he were hiding something inside. She took a breath and reminded herself not to imagine things. After all, she was just a maid. It wasn't her place to wonder about guests. Yet, the unease in her chest refused to go away. She moved slowly around the hall, serving drinks, but her eyes often returned to the man. He never joined a conversation, never clapped at the music, never smiled. He only waited, his gaze sharp and cold. Angela decided to whisper her concern to another maid who passed by. "Do you see that man by the far wall?" she asked softly. The other maid barely looked. "He's just another guest," she replied quickly, hurrying off with her tray. Angela tried again, this time with one of the junior security guards standing near the entrance. She stepped close and murmured, "The man near the painting, he looks strange. Maybe you should watch him." The guard gave her a short glance, then shook his head. "Miss, don't worry about the guests. Focus on your work." His voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. To him, Angela was just a maid with no authority. For a moment, Angela felt small, invisible once more. It would have been easy to let the thought go, to push down her unease and return to polishing glasses or carrying trays. After all, she had been ignored before. People rarely listened to her. Why should tonight be different? But as the minutes passed, her heart grew heavier. Every time she looked, the man was still there, his hand never far from his jacket. And every time she glanced at Mr. Whitmore, surrounded by guests who admired him, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Angela remembered her mother's words from long ago, when you see something dangerous, never look away. Doing nothing can be as harmful as doing wrong. Those words echoed in her ears now, louder than the music in the hall. She walked closer to the group of servers gathered near the kitchen door, hoping one of them might take her seriously. "Please," she whispered urgently, "someone should check that man near the corner. I think he's hiding something." But the head server gave her a sharp look. "Angela, this is an important night. Don't cause trouble with silly worries. The guests are here to enjoy themselves. If we start questioning people, it will embarrass Mr. Whitmore." Her face burned with frustration. She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She only wanted to keep everyone safe. But once again, her voice carried no weight. She was only a maid, invisible in a world where titles and wealth decided whose words mattered. Still, Angela couldn't shake her instincts. She had spent years observing people in silence, noticing small details others missed. And her instincts had never failed her before. Tonight, those instincts told her something was dangerously out of place. She continued her work, but every step felt heavier. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered drinks to a group of women in gowns. Her eyes kept drifting to the corner where the man stood. The celebration grew louder. Laughter filled the air, music rose, and the glittering lights seemed to shine brighter. But for Angela, it was as though a shadow had fallen over the hall. Her heart beat faster with every passing minute. At one point, she saw the man shift slightly, his eyes narrowing as Mr. Whitmore moved closer to the center of the room. Angela's breath caught. She knew now that her fear wasn't just imagination. Something was about to happen, and if no one else would act, she would have to decide whether she would remain silent or step forward. She looked around the hall one last time, hoping to catch the eye of someone who might listen, but everyone was too busy laughing, clinking glasses, or admiring the music. Angela's heart raced. She was alone in her worry, ignored and unseen. Yet, deep inside, she felt a strength growing. She may have been invisible to the world, but that didn't mean her courage was small. And so, as the man shifted again, his hand pressing against his jacket, Angela knew she could no longer wait for others to believe her. She had to trust her own eyes, her own instincts. The moment of choice was approaching, and her life was about to change forever. Angela's heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She had seen the man's hand press against his jacket again, and something inside her screamed that this was the moment. The hall was alive with laughter and music, but to her, every sound grew faint. It was as if the world had slowed down, leaving her alone with the sight of that man moving forward, step by step, toward Mr. Whitmore. She clutched her tray tightly, her fingers trembling against the silver surface. All around her, people smiled and toasted, their eyes blind to the danger standing in plain sight. She wanted to scream, to shout out a warning, but fear held her voice. What if she was wrong? What if she embarrassed herself and lost her job? These thoughts swirled through her mind for a split second, but then another thought broke through: what if I'm right, and no one stops him? Angela knew she couldn't wait for others to believe her. Her instincts had carried her this far, and tonight they were louder than ever. She took a deep breath, steadied her steps, and began walking toward the man. Every stride felt heavy, as though she were pushing against an invisible wall of fear. The man's eyes flicked to her briefly. For a moment, his expression didn't change, but Angela saw it, the brief flicker of irritation, like he didn't want her near. That look alone gave her the final confirmation: he was hiding something, and whatever it was not harmless. As she came closer, she lifted the tray in her hands, pretending to offer him a drink. Her voice was calm, though her heart raced. "Would you like a refreshment, sir?" she asked softly. The man shook his head sharply, waving her away, his hand tightening near his jacket. That small, sudden movement was all Angela needed to act. With one swift motion, she tilted the tray forward, bumping it against his arm as if by accident. Glasses clattered loudly, liquid splashed, and the sudden noise made several guests turn their heads. The man's hand slipped from his jacket, revealing the hidden object he had been gripping so tightly. It wasn't a harmless gesture at all, it was a dangerous tool meant to harm. Gasps filled the air as guests realized what they were seeing. For a moment, everything froze. The man's eyes widened in shock, furious at being exposed. Angela stood frozen too, her tray empty in her hands, her heart thundering as the truth spilled out in front of everyone. Then chaos erupted. Security guards rushed forward, shouting commands. Guests screamed and stumbled back, clutching each other in fear. The man struggled, trying to pull free, but Angela's sudden action had bought just enough time. The guards caught hold of him, forcing him to the ground before he could move any further. Angela stepped back, breathing hard, her entire body trembling from the rush of fear and adrenaline. She had done it. She had stopped him, though she hadn't planned how. Her quick choice, her courage to act when no one else believed her, had prevented something terrible. In the corner of her vision, she saw Mr. Whitmore being pulled to safety by two of his advisors, his face pale with shock. He looked at Angela for a brief moment, his eyes wide, as though finally seeing her not as a maid carrying trays, but as the person who had just changed the course of the night. The hall, once filled with music and joy, now echoed with hurried footsteps, frightened voices, and sharp commands from the guards. Guests huddled in groups, whispering in disbelief about what had just happened. Angela stood quietly near the wall, her hands shaking, her clothes damp from spilled drinks. She didn't seek attention, nor did she want to explain herself. She was simply relieved that no one had been harmed. But inside, her heart was a storm. What if she hadn't acted? What if she had listened to the ones who ignored her? She shivered at the thought. One of the guards approached her, his face stern but his eyes filled with respect. "Miss, what you did," he shook his head slowly. "If you hadn't stepped in, things could have ended very differently." Angela nodded weakly, unable to find words. She didn't feel like a hero, she felt like someone who had done what needed to be done. But as she looked around at the shaken faces of the guests, she realized the weight of her choice. She had not only saved Mr. Whitmore, she had saved everyone in that room from a night that could have turned into tragedy. Slowly, the music stopped, and silence took over the grand hall. Mr. Whitmore, still surrounded by advisors, made his way back toward the center. He looked shaken but steady, his voice calm as he assured the guests that they were safe. Many eyes turned toward Angela, the maid who had been invisible for so long, now standing in the middle of the story no one would forget. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the sudden attention. She had lived her life in the background, unnoticed and unimportant to most. But tonight, her quiet observation and courage had placed her at the very center. For the rest of the evening, Angela kept to herself, standing near the edge of the room as the guards cleared the situation and escorted the man away. Whispers filled the hall, her name passing from one guest to another, though many of them didn't even know it. They only knew the story: a maid noticed what no one else did, and she saved a billionaire's life. Angela thought of her mother's words again. She had always believed dignity came from doing one's work honestly. Tonight, she had done more than just work honestly, she had trusted her instincts, even when no one else trusted her. And that had made all the difference. When the final guests left the mansion, Angela walked slowly to her small staff quarters, her legs still weak. The mansion that had always seemed so big and full of light felt strangely quiet now. She sat on her bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap, replaying the night in her mind over and over again. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if her life would change or if people would soon forget her role. But one thing was certain: tonight, she had proven to herself that courage didn't require titles, wealth, or recognition. It only required a heart willing to act when it mattered most. The mansion felt different the next morning. The grand chandeliers still hung in place, the carpets still stretched across the white halls, and the garden outside still bloomed with flowers. Yet, there was a silence in the air that was heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves remembered what had happened the night before. Angela woke up early, just as she always did. She folded her blanket neatly, straightened her small bed, and washed her face in the little sink in her staff quarters. Her hands were still trembling slightly, as though the memory of the night had not left her body. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, a face marked with worry, but behind them, something new, the quiet strength of someone who had faced fear and not turned away. She dressed in her uniform and made her way to the main hall. She expected everything to continue as it always had, with staff moving about, preparing for the day. But when she entered, she noticed something unusual. People were looking at her differently. Instead of passing her by without notice, their eyes lingered on her, filled with whispers and nods. One of the young maids approached her, her face full of admiration. "Angela," she whispered, "everyone is talking about you. You saved Mr. Whitmore. You saved all of us." Angela shook her head softly. "I only did what anyone should do," she replied. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Many had seen the man. Many had walked past him. Yet only she had acted. When Mr. Whitmore finally entered the hall, silence followed him. His usual presence carried weight, but today it carried something else too: gratitude. He walked straight toward Angela. For a moment, she wished she could disappear into the walls, as she often did. But his eyes held hers firmly. "Angela," he said in a voice that carried through the hall, "last night, you did something extraordinary. You saw what no one else saw. You acted when no one else acted. And because of you, I am alive." The staff members around them lowered their heads in respect. Some of the guards even nodded at her. For the first time in her life at the mansion, Angela felt truly seen. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Finally, she whispered, "I only did what I felt was right, sir." Mr. Whitmore's face softened. "And that," he said gently, "is exactly why it was remarkable." News of the incident had already begun to spread beyond the mansion. By afternoon, reporters stood at the gates, their cameras flashing, their voices eager for details. They spoke of the unknown maid whose courage had saved one of the most powerful men in the country. Though Angela remained inside, away from the noise, her name began to carry meaning outside the walls. But Angela herself felt torn. She had never sought attention, never wanted to be in the center of stories. She was a simple woman who believed in doing her work with honesty. Now, however, the world seemed determined to place her on a pedestal she had not asked for. Later that day, Mr. Whitmore called her into his study. The room was grand, filled with tall bookshelves and leather chairs, but the photo of his late wife on the desk softened its richness. Angela stood near the door, her hands folded nervously in front of her. "Please, sit," he said warmly. She hesitated, unused to being offered a seat in his private space, but finally lowered herself into the chair across from him. "Angela," he began, leaning forward, "I owe you my life. No amount of wealth, no treasure, no business deal can compare to what you gave me last night, a second chance to live. I will never forget that." Her eyes lowered. "I only did what my heart told me to do, sir." He smiled gently. "And that is what makes you braver than most." He then paused, his tone becoming more serious. "I want to do something for you. Not as payment, because what you did cannot be measured, but as gratitude. Tell me, what do you dream of? What do you want for your life?" Angela's heart skipped. No one had ever asked her that before. Dreams were things she kept hidden, quietly stored in the corners of her heart. She thought of her mother's words, of the little cafe she had once imagined. But she hesitated to speak. What if he laughed? What if he thought her dream was foolish compared to his world of millions? Finally, she whispered, I've always dreamed of having a small cafe. A place where people can sit, share stories, and feel welcome. Nothing big, just simple. A place full of kindness. Mr. Whitmore listened carefully, his eyes thoughtful. Then he nodded slowly. A cafe. That is a beautiful dream, Angela. And I believe you deserve it. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. Sir, I wasn't asking, I know, he interrupted softly. That is why I want to help you. You never asked for recognition, and yet you acted when no one else did. Sometimes, life gives us moments that reveal who we truly are. Last night revealed you. And I will make sure your dream becomes possible. Angela's chest swelled with emotions she could barely control. Gratitude, disbelief, joy, it was too much at once. She wiped at her eyes quickly, not wanting to cry in front of him, but her voice trembled as she said, Thank you, sir. Truly, thank you. From that day forward, her life began to change. Though she continued her duties in the mansion for the time being, she was no longer invisible. Guests greeted her by name, staff members looked at her with respect, and even the guards spoke to her with warmth. She felt both humbled and overwhelmed, unsure how to carry the sudden weight of recognition. Yet, through it all, Angela remained the same at her core. She still polished the tables with care, still arranged the flowers thoughtfully, still moved quietly through the halls. For her, respect was not about fame or rewards, it was about living truthfully and doing what was right. As days passed, she found herself reflecting more deeply on courage. She realized courage was not the absence of fear. Last night, she had been afraid, terrified, in fact. But courage had been her decision to act despite that fear. And that, she thought, was something anyone could do, no matter their position in life. Sometimes, late at night in her small room, Angela thought of her mother. She wished she could sit with her again, share a cup of tea, and tell her everything. She imagined her mother smiling, her eyes shining with pride. The thought warmed Angela's heart and reminded her that every small lesson her mother had given her had led to this moment. Angela's life in the mansion continued, but now it carried a new rhythm. The quiet maid who had once blended into the background was no longer just a servant. She was a symbol of vigilance, humility, and bravery. People whispered her story, not because of wealth or beauty, but because of her heart. And though Angela still walked with quiet steps, she carried herself taller, her eyes brighter. She had grown not in status or riches alone, but in the knowledge that one act of courage could change everything. Angela's life never returned to what it had been before that night. The mansion looked the same, the hallways still glowed with golden light, and the gardens still filled the air with fragrance. But for Angela, everything felt different. She was no longer invisible. Her footsteps, once ignored, now echoed with meaning. Her presence, once overlooked, now carried weight. In the days following the incident, news of her bravery spread far beyond the walls of Mr. Whitmore's home. Newspapers wrote about her. Reporters stood outside the mansion gates, calling her name. Television channels repeated the story of the maid who had noticed what no one else did, the maid who had saved a billionaire's life. For Angela, it was surreal. She had never sought attention, never even imagined being spoken about on screens or in papers. And yet, here she was the center of a story that had captured the hearts of many. At first, she felt shy and overwhelmed. She didn't know how to handle strangers asking for her picture or journalists writing about her courage. She had always been comfortable in the background, blending into silence. Now, the world seemed to shine a bright light on her, and it frightened her as much as it humbled her. But in time, Angela began to understand something important. People weren't just fascinated by the drama of the night. They were inspired by her. They saw in her story a reminder that ordinary people, quiet, unseen, often ignored, could carry within them extraordinary courage. They saw proof that dignity and bravery didn't depend on titles, wealth, or fame, but on the choices made in a single moment of truth. Mr. Whitmore, true to his word, did not let her bravery go unrecognized. One afternoon, he invited her once more to his study. His voice was warm as he told her, "Angela, the world now knows what I have learned. You are someone with a rare strength. You have given me back my life, and I intend to honor that gift." On his desk lay papers, plans, documents, and blueprints. At first, Angela didn't understand. Then he explained, with a smile, "This is your cafe. The one you dreamed of. I will help you build it, Angela. Not as charity, but as a celebration of the person you are." Angela's hands trembled as she touched the papers. She could hardly believe her eyes. The cafe she had once only whispered to herself in the quiet of her small room, the dream she thought would never leave her imagination, was becoming real. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, she did not hide them. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. The months that followed were filled with work, real work, but work that thrilled her heart. She helped design the cafe, choosing simple wooden tables, soft lighting, and warm colors that invited people to stay, talk, and feel at home. She selected books for shelves, paintings for the walls, and plants to brighten every corner. Every decision was guided by her heart and her dream, to create a space filled with kindness and warmth, unlike the cold glitter she had often seen in the mansion's parties. When the cafe finally opened, the small bell above the door chimed with the sound of new beginnings. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came, curious to see the place created by the maid who had saved a life. At first, many came out of curiosity, but soon they began to return because of the cafe's soul. It was a place of laughter, of simple meals made with love, of conversations that stretched for hours. It became what Angela had always wanted, a home for kindness. Angela herself worked there daily, greeting every guest with a warm smile, listening to their stories, and making them feel important. She was no longer the invisible maid in the background, she was now the heart of a place where everyone was welcome. Mr. Whitmore visited often. He would sit by the window with a cup of tea, quietly watching the joy Angela had created. Sometimes he would speak to her about business, sometimes about life, but most often, he simply smiled, proud of the woman who had changed not only his life but her own. Over time, Angela's story continued to inspire people. Articles were written about her cafe, about how a simple act of courage had bloomed into something beautiful. She was invited to speak at community gatherings, not about wealth or power, but about the power of observation, the strength of trust in oneself, and the importance of acting with dignity. Angela often told people, "I was afraid that night. Truly afraid." But courage is not about being fearless. Courage is about choosing to act, even when fear is loud in your heart. Her words touched many because they came not from books or speeches, but from her lived experience. Her life was no longer just about survival. It was about growth, purpose, and giving back. Angela hired young people from her neighborhood to work at the cafe, offering them not just jobs but encouragement. She decorated one corner of the cafe with a shelf of free books for children, remembering how stories had once kept her company on lonely nights. She hosted small gatherings for mothers, workers, and elders, reminding them that they too deserved spaces of peace and kindness. In quiet moments, when the cafe lights dimmed and the last customer had gone, Angela often sat by the window with a cup of tea. She would look out at the street, the soft glow of lamps, and think of the journey that had brought her here. A maid who had once been invisible. A woman who had dared to trust her instincts. A heart that had chosen courage in the face of fear. She realized then that life had given her more than she had asked for. She had not only saved another's life, she had saved her own spirit from the shadows of invisibility. She had stepped into her own light, quietly but powerfully. Angela knew her story would not be remembered forever in the grand way of history books. But she also knew it didn't need to be. Her story lived in the people she touched, in the customers who left her cafe with lighter hearts, in the young workers who found encouragement under her care, and in the countless strangers who found courage through her example. And perhaps, she thought with a gentle smile, that was the truest way to be remembered. Not through fame or riches, but through the kindness and courage left behind in the lives of others. That night, as she closed the cafe and locked the door, Angela looked up at the stars. The same stars that had once seemed distant and unreachable now felt closer, as though they too were smiling down at her. She whispered softly to herself, "I was once invisible. But now, I know I was always meant to be seen." And with that, Angela walked home, her steps light, her heart full, carrying the quiet victory of a life transformed by courage, kindness, and an unshakable belief that even the smallest voice can make the greatest difference.